So you write this story called Harvest,
Yes.
which is set in the South.
Right.
And then there's something very unusual that happens in terms of how this ended up being published and how you found out.
Yeah, I was living, my mother had died the first day of 75, and I moved for a time to Philadelphia and stayed with the parents of a college roommate. And when I was there from January to February, around April, I think I wrote the story. And I sent it off, and I came back down to Washington in June. And I don't know when Essence said yes, because the people in Philadelphia never forwarded any mail. So we went from April of 75 until like September of 76. And finally they sent what was then called Mailgram. And it was saying the story was being published. It was coming out in a matter of weeks or something like that. I still don't know how they did that because I never signed anything. But they gave me $400, and for a whole month I could go into any People's Drugstore and take the magazine off the shelf and see my name in black and white.
So what does it mean for a young author at that time, if you can think back and think about what it is to be a young writer publishing for the first time in Kweli, say? How important is it for a young writer to have that experience of a beginning?
I think for me it was because my circumstances weren't that great. I had a job and I lived in just one room. And a lot of the time it was rather lonely, but once the story came out, I sort of felt as if I belonged. It does something tremendously to you. And the feeling of that went on and on, so that the next year, I think it was George Washington had this program where a writer would come in and teach a course at the university and also one to people in the community, and I applied with a certain amount of confidence that I would be accepted, and I was. And that same sort of confidence went with me when I applied to graduate school. So it was, it did a lot. It was tremendous. And if I close my eyes and think back, I can still see myself going into those drugstores. And my mother had died too, and that was, I see, I'm carrying that around. And unfortunately, of course, she never saw it.
You've dedicated all three of your books to your mother, and you continue to write with her voice in your head. How has the process, I don't mean day to day, but how you think about the writing you do? Now you have, Edward has 2 story collections which are connected like no 2 other story collections I know of. They're 14 stories each, and each story in the first collection is revisited in the second story, not as a sequel, not as a continuation, but somehow a small character in one is connected to a larger character in the next. They're sort of 2 hands that join. That's certainly nothing you could have conceived of when you wrote Harvest in the 70s. I wonder how your thoughts about this evolving body of work, which now includes a novel, it includes 28 stories. How do you think about your project?
I don't really. I mean, I suppose the only time I really think about it is when I'm called upon to read. Other than that, the books are there somewhere in the apartment, but I really don't visit them very much. I think that despite all the good things that have happened to me, what I've always realized is that none of those good things can help me write whatever will come next. And it was the way you got this award, you got that award. Well, if I sit down to write, I can't take all of those awards and put them on the laptop and say, work. What I also say is that you can write 1 million stories, but when you get to the 1,000,001st story, you're back down at the bottom of the mountain.
So it's always a view from the bottom.
You're always starting over.
Is there any less frustration that you encounter from being at the bottom?
No, because I think the thing is that because you're taking these people who never existed, and you're trying to create them. It'd be one thing, if it were from my own life or the lives of people I know, you just sort of change a little this and a little that, and you go on your way. But these are all people who never existed at all, and it's hard. It's hard making them real. It's hard making them believable. It's hard making them do logical things that a reader will accept.
If writing gets harder, it seems that we live in a culture where reading has gotten harder. You told me earlier that when you were a student in college, you were expected to read a book a week in a course you were taking in English literature. And now someone told you that, oh, the students they can't do that. How do you think that the world is changing the way we read? And do you think that there's any change in the way a writer needs to approach his art in such a time?
I don't know. I'm not someone who goes out to a lot of parties, or invited to dinner 3 or 4 times a week. For the most part, I'm in my apartment where I pay rent, and it's just me in the apartment. I don't really, go out and about and ask questions of the world. So I really can't answer that. Really, I wouldn't know what to say.
Do you see in your students an approach to reading or writing that seems very foreign to you or new?
Yeah, a lot of them, for some reason, it seems as if they've never read a book in their lives. It's just... These are undergraduates too, but I remember a few years ago, I was teaching at something in Washington area called the Writers Center, and these are people who are out in the world. They have day jobs, and this woman, I think she was 35 or 40. She was writing dialogue as if she had never read a book, and I always have conferences with my students, either in person or at that time over the phone. And we were talking on the phone, and I said, go and get a book off the shelf and look how the dialogue is laid out. And she was quite surprised. I don't know how you can get to be 35 wanting to be a writer and don't know what dialogue should look like on the page.
So what do you think is the impulse, if not reading other people's work, that makes a young writer want to write in the classes that you've seen?
I think they think it's easy. Little this and little that, as long as you have a dictionary, you can do it.
All the words are there.
Yeah, huh?
All the words are there.
Yeah, it's already there. But yeah, some of them seem to want to do fancy language, and I tell them time and time again, if the story is powerful enough, then simple, plain language will do the job. And they seem unable to accept that at times. A few of them, I think, have gotten things better since January, but there are others who just, we're going to plow ahead no matter what I say.
Let's have a short example of some of what I don't see as very plain language, but rather just plainly beautiful language. This is from Edward's first story collection, Lost in the City, a story called Young Lions, featuring a young man named Caesar, who we re-encounter in the second story collection. And Caesar's visiting his father's home in the absence of his father. Caesar touched nearly everything along the way. A lace piece made by his grandmother that was on the back of the easy chair in the living room. A drawing of the house signed and dated by his sister taped to the refrigerator. The kitchen curtains he had helped his mother put up. In a corner of the kitchen counter, he found, wrapped in a rubber band, the letters he had been sending to his father. Only the first one had been opened. He turned away and went to his sister's room, where he touched the head of the 3 stuffed animals sitting on the pillows of her bed. In the room he had shared with his brother, he took as many of his clothes as he could carry his hands, shaking each time he picked up an item. One of the things that I go to your stories for repeatedly is to find these moments of unlikely intimacy and aloneness with people who, when we see their acts in the public world, like Caesar, who in the first story and in the later story, hurts people, you manage in a very real way to find those moments where they are more fully themselves, not simply their worst actions.
Yeah, the great task when you're dealing with someone who's not a nice human being is to show all facets. It's rather